Behind the gleaming glass and steel of a high-rise empire, a shadow lingers, unseen, unheard, but not powerless. A man whose ideas ignite fires in boardrooms, yet whose presence is met with cold dismissal and silent scorn, all because the world judges him by the shade of his skin. The atmosphere thickens with arrogance and prejudice, a fortress built to keep him out. But beneath the surface of exclusion and contempt lies a secret weapon, a truth so devastating it will shatter the very foundation of this corporate kingdom. What unfolds is a gripping reckoning where the ignored hand holds the reins of justice, and the invisible becomes unstoppable. If this story grips you, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. What do you think lurks beneath the polished facade? Share your thoughts below, because sometimes the biggest power plays happen in silence. The revolving doors at Orbis Technologies rotated smoothly as Malik stepped through them just before 8 a.m. The lobby was a portrait of sterile elegance, white marble floors, brushed metal finishes, and wall-mounted digital displays that pulsed with shifting infographics about innovation, market share, and transformation. But no one in the lobby looked at him twice. The receptionist barely registered his presence beyond the typical corporate smile she gave everyone wearing a badge. She didn't recognize the man who'd be introduced internally as a key figure in the company's upcoming restructuring. Malik said nothing. He didn't remind her. He adjusted the folio under his arm and moved toward the elevator. Two employees waited inside, both of them wearing sharp navy suits and wireless headsets. One glanced at Malik, glanced again, then subtly pressed the door open button and stepped out, murmuring something about forgetting a file. The other stood stiffly as the doors closed, keeping a precise 3-foot distance between them. Malik said nothing. He had long since learned how to read coded movements in professional spaces. The elevator glided to the 27th floor, where glass dominated the architecture and the air smelled faintly of cold brew and cedar polish. This was the floor reserved for executives and department leads. He stepped out and headed left toward Conference Room B. No one was there to greet him. He wasn't late, but the meeting had already started. Through the glass walls, he could see 30 chairs filled with well-dressed professionals and one presenter at the front clicking through slides. He entered quietly and took the last seat in the back row. No heads turned, no acknowledgement. A few people glanced his way, then looked down at their phones. The monitor showed a PowerPoint titled Executive Integration, Q3 and Beyond. It was sleek, bold, corporate. Faces of department heads flashed on screen one by one. Names, titles, smiling headshots with polished lighting. Toward the end of the sequence, Malik's face appeared, cropped harshly down the middle. Only half his head was visible. The title below read Strategic Advisory, Pending, in a smaller font than the others. It disappeared after 2 seconds. No one said anything. The next slide popped up quarterly milestones, as though the glitch had never happened. Malik's eyes tracked the presenter. The man spoke confidently, referencing projected numbers and budget realignments, but never once acknowledged the newest person in the room. Malik studied the audience instead. One man whispered to another and laughed quietly. A woman 2 rows ahead of him pulled out her phone and began swiping through a social media feed. No one took notes. No one introduced themselves. After the presentation ended, coffee and bagels were laid out on a side table. Small clusters formed instantly. Everyone seemed to know each other. Malik approached the table, poured himself coffee into a generic paper cup, and looked around for anyone, who might greet him. The HR coordinator walked by, glanced at his badge, hesitated, then smiled tightly and moved on without a word. One executive laughed a little too loudly behind him and said something about contractors slipping into orientation. Malik walked away. There was no orientation packet for him, no schedule. When he asked an assistant about it, she looked confused, tapped on her iPad, and then said she didn't see him listed. "You're here with facilities, right?" she asked with a polite but disinterested tone. He nodded once, softly, and walked out of the room. Let her believe what she wanted. For now, he had other things to attend to. At 10:15 a.m., Malik found the office number he had been assigned in a terse onboarding email sent late the night before, room 2748. He reached the door and stopped. The nameplate slot was empty. Taped beside the doorframe was a laminated printout that read IT storage in fading ink. The door was unlocked. Inside, there was a folding table and a spare office chair with a wobbly leg. No monitor, no docking station. A single overhead light flickered weakly in the corner. A stack of unopened printer paper sat untouched beneath the table. Malik walked in, closed the door, and stood still. The room was cold and too quiet. He opened his folio and reviewed the organizational chart again. There was his name, third from the top under Executive Strategy Division. No one had said it aloud. Not in the meeting, not in the emails, not even the assistant. At 11:40 a.m., he called IT for access credentials. The help desk operator paused for several beats after taking his name, then said she hadn't been notified of any new executive-level onboarding. We'll escalate it and follow up. The call ended. He never received a confirmation. Around noon, Malik decided to visit the cafeteria. He grabbed a tray, selected a sandwich, a bottle of water, and an apple, then scanned his badge at the register. The reader blinked red. The cashier tried again. Red again. "This one's not activated yet," she said, handing him the tray back like a returned item. Malik opened his wallet and paid in cash. When he sat at a table near the window, the only empty one in the room, a group of 3 younger employees made eye contact, paused, then sat 2 rows over with their backs to him. Without speaking, Malik reached into his pocket and produced the paper visitor pass he had been forced to take yesterday. The receptionist waved him through without offering a replacement. Still no ID, still no access, still no name. He rode the elevator alone again, then walked toward his designated office. The smell of paint was stronger than yesterday, sharp and chemical, like it had been done in a rush. The door, now fully dry, was gleaming white with a fresh coat. But the laminated IT supply storage sign still dangled from the knob, curling at the edges from age. Someone had taken time to repaint the door, but no one had bothered to remove the label. That detail sat in Malik's mind like a quiet alarm. Inside, nothing had changed. The same folding table, the same unstable chair, the same stack of untouched printer paper. On the wall, faint outlines of where a whiteboard or monitor had once been removed were still visible. Dust had settled in the corners. The air conditioner made an inconsistent tapping noise, like it was out of sync with the rest of the system. Malik sat down and opened his folio. The org chart remained unchanged. His name, still there, Strategic Advisor, reporting directly to the CEO. Yet no action, no structure, and no welcome reinforced that truth. His inbox, now partially active, contained 3 emails. 2 were automatic confirmations from facilities. The third was a meeting invite for a weekly admin sync, clearly not meant for him. There was no direct outreach from his colleagues, no agenda, no directives, no real acknowledgement that he existed. Even the system had doubts. Mid-morning, he stepped out of the office to find coffee. At the espresso bar, a group of senior associates gathered around discussing an upcoming pitch. One of them, balding, with horn-rimmed glasses, glanced at Malik, lowered his voice, and whispered something that made the others laugh behind their cups. Malik waited quietly in line. When it was his turn, the barista asked if he had an employee ID number to apply the company discount. He repeated his name clearly. She typed, then frowned. Nothing in the system. She shrugged, apologetic but indifferent. He paid full price. No one in line behind him made eye contact. Back in his office, the badge he'd been issued had been dropped through the mail slot. It sat on the floor, face up. He picked it up, turned it over. It read M. Dayton. No department, no role, just a name reduced to an initial, stripped of context. He held it between his fingers for a moment, then clipped it to his pocket without correcting it. He knew what it meant. This wasn't a typo. It was a message. At noon, he received a calendar notification about a working lunch for strategy leads. He made his way to the designated room, a conference suite with glass walls and a skyline view. Inside, trays of food were laid out beside bottled water and company-branded notebooks. He entered and sat at the far end of the table. One by one, others filed in, men in monogrammed dress shirts, women in structured dresses, voices loud and easy with familiarity. No one sat near him. The space around him remained empty like a buffer zone. As sandwiches were passed around, the platter skipped him. When he reached for it himself, a junior analyst politely but mechanically said they were for registered attendees only. He didn't argue. He sat back, hands folded, and watched the meeting unfold. Charts were projected. KPIs were discussed. Names were dropped into conversation like currency. His wasn't one of them. At one point, the director of operations referenced incoming external advisors and joked about how long it might take to onboard them properly. A few people chuckled. Malik didn't. When the meeting ended, the lead facilitator passed around a printed handout for action items. Malik didn't receive a copy. He left without one. Back at his office, a sticky note had been left on his door. It read, "Call Janice from Legal Re, Asset Clearance," with no phone number, no last name. No one had knocked. No one had emailed. Just a casual instruction left like graffiti. He called the company directory, requested legal, and asked for Janice. The receptionist paused, then said, "Which department are you calling from?" Malik identified himself. A silence followed. Then a transfer. No one picked up. The line rang out. By late afternoon, Malik's office light had begun to flicker steadily. Maintenance passed his door twice, looked inside, said they'd log a ticket. No one returned. He worked by the glow of his laptop screen, battery running low since no charging cables had been delivered. Outside his door, someone laughed, loud, performative, sharp. The sound trailed off down the hall. He didn't move. His stomach was empty. He hadn't eaten. The cafeteria line had been too long. His badge still didn't work. And when he asked for a manual override, the manager said they don't usually make exceptions. That evening, Malik left the building unnoticed. The exit scanner beeped red once more. A security guard looked up, nodded absently, and pressed the release manually. Malik nodded back, eyes calm, expression unreadable. On the train ride home, he reviewed the day. Every interaction, every silence, every omission. He had also accepted that his office, still marked as IT supply storage, had become a place people passed by without looking, a silent tomb where his efforts lived and died without impact. That day, Malik opened his folio and reviewed the outline he had written for the upcoming Q3 leadership briefing. The proposal was thorough. Projections, cost-saving recommendations, partnership reevaluations, and 3 key strategic pivots backed by clean historical data. But to finalize it, he needed real-time numbers from finance, operations, and procurement. At 8:12 a.m., he sent 3 separate but related emails, subject lines all marked for Q3 strategic brief urgent data access request. He copied only the department leads. Each email was written clearly, with respectful tone, bullet-pointed asks, and internal reference codes. At 8:37 a.m., all 3 were marked read. At 9:02, the first was forwarded to a support lead. At 9:10, the second was replied to with a single line, "Looping in team." At 9:26, the third was forwarded again, this time to an internal alias with no further comment. By 11:45 a.m., all 3 had landed back in his own inbox, part of a thread he now owned, devoid of answers, cluttered with pointless CCs and nested forwards. No new information, just motion without progress. That, Malik noted, was a tactic disguised as routine. He closed the inbox without replying. That afternoon, he submitted a formal report to the legal team, an internal compliance summary he'd written as part of his onboarding analysis. It included 5 flagged vendor contracts with questionable terms, none of which had been reviewed since the acquisition. He submitted it via the internal portal, marked it internal priority, and sent a courtesy notification to the team's inbox. At 3:07 p.m., He saw a junior legal analyst walk past his door holding something rolled in her hand. She didn't knock. A few minutes later, Malik took a break, walked down the hallway, and paused near the corkboard outside the HR office. There, pinned between a flyer for the summer softball team and a sign-up sheet for ergonomic assessments, was his report. It had been printed out, stapled at the corner, and marked with red ink that read, "Not an internal format, please revise." The handwriting was awkward and young. He recognized the name in the corner, a junior hire, 3 weeks into the job. Someone who hadn't spoken to him once. Malik stood there for several long seconds, long enough for a pair of staffers to walk by and glance at the report. One smirked. The other read the first page and walked off shaking her head. He didn't take the paper down. He didn't speak to anyone about it. He just returned to his mislabeled office and reopened the document. He compared it to the company's legal formatting template. His structure matched all the critical elements: headings, references, citations. The only missing component was a footer logo that could have been added in less than 10 seconds. It wasn't about the format. It was about the framing. They weren't reviewing the content. They were dismissing the source. The pattern was obvious now. Every legitimate function he attempted to perform was rerouted through bureaucratic camouflage, slowing him, discouraging him, erasing his relevance under the guise of process. But Malik didn't adjust his work to seek acceptance. He adjusted his observations. That evening, he walked the halls an hour after most had left. In silence, he traced the flow of how information was posted, how names appeared on documents, how credit was shared in team reports tacked to walls and department bulletins. His name appeared nowhere. Not in shout-outs, not in weekly wins, not even in the org snapshot printed near the stairwell. He was a ghost with a title no one wanted to validate. At 6:40 p.m., he received a calendar invite to the upcoming leadership meeting. It included everyone in the executive tier, 32 names. His name was listed too, but misspelled as Malcolm Drayton. His role was tagged as TBD. He stared at it for a moment, then declined the invite, not because he wouldn't attend, but because he had no interest in confirming a title they refused to assign. The meeting would happen in 2 days. He would be there, but not as they expected. The next morning, he drafted a new version of his financial access request. This time, he forwarded it directly to the chief financial officer, not her assistants. He added a one-line clarification, following up on unresolved request, no data provided to date. At 10:11 a.m., he received a bounce-back message. Recipient is out of office until further notice. At 11:26 a.m., he received a second bounce-back, this time from the CFO's executive assistant. No replacement designated. Please contact department leads for support. The same cycle, the same result. He logged the entire thread, saved every message, every date, every passive delay. He wasn't building a paper trail. He was mapping the anatomy of silent sabotage. On his way to lunch, he passed by the conference room again. Through the glass walls, he saw the same junior legal analyst laughing with 2 others. She pointed toward the corkboard. One of them turned to look. He kept walking. In the cafeteria, he reached the register again. His badge still didn't scan. As he crossed the lobby, he noticed something different. The building's internal screens, which looped birthday shout-outs and department wins, were now playing a silent slideshow of last week's Leadership Culture Week. Dozens of candid photos flashed by. Executives high-fiving, laughing during team-building exercises, posing with certificates and branded mugs. Malik's face was absent. He had been there. He had stood in the background of 3 of those events. In one of them, he had helped the logistics team reset their banners when they collapsed mid-photo. But in the final edit, he was nowhere. Not even in the corners. Not even blurred. He had been cropped out with surgical precision. His stomach didn't drop. Not anymore. It simply firmed. When he stepped off the elevator, his badge finally scanned green, but instead of a greeting from the system, a pop-up message appeared. Restricted access zone. Escort required. He entered anyway. No one stopped him. The hallway leading to his office had new posters lining the walls, motivational quotes paired with images of team members. Dare to lead. On the moment. Be seen. Each caption featured a name and title below. None featured him. He passed an admin walking by, who nodded at him, then looked away quickly, as if contact required clearance. Outside his door, a maintenance cart blocked the entrance. A janitor, middle-aged and chewing gum slowly, looked up and said, "They're replacing the panel lights. Might take a while." Malik nodded. "No rush," he said calmly, and waited without moving. The janitor eventually rolled the cart aside and left without apology. Malik pushed open the door. The IT storage sign was gone now, but nothing had replaced it. A blank wall, freshly painted, held no evidence of his name or role. Inside, a new coat of matte paint had dulled the already lifeless walls. The chair was missing. So was the folding table. What remained was a single stool, like one from a break room, and a small, wall-mounted shelf barely big enough to hold a notebook. On the shelf sat a used mouse pad and an Ethernet cable curled loosely. No monitor, no docking station, no drawer, file cabinet, or whiteboard. It wasn't an office anymore. It was a placeholder, a forgotten utility closet rebranded as neutrality. Malik set his folio down on the floor, straightened his sleeves, and sat on the stool without comment. At 10:03 a.m., he received a group email labeled Leadership Lounge Access Reminder. It outlined a new policy. Access to the 28th floor executive lounge would now require verified clearance, approved bi-weekly by a senior team lead. Malik scrolled down. His name was missing from the pre-approved list. No note, no explanation. The message came from someone he'd never spoken to, and the CCs were carefully chosen. Names with influence, but none with authority to overrule it. At lunch, he entered the cafeteria and headed toward the back table near the windows, the one he'd sat at each day in quiet routine. It was occupied now, not just taken, but claimed. A team of 5 engineers had clustered around it, their belongings spread wide like a territorial line. As Malik passed, one of them looked up, glanced at him, and set her water bottle down directly in the last open seat. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Malik picked another table, one closer to the trash bins, angled away from the windows. It was slightly sticky. He didn't care. The walls around him echoed with easy conversation and inside jokes. His space was outside that perimeter. As he ate, he watched a screen in the corner run a video montage of employee testimonials about company culture. One testimonial featured a woman he remembered from orientation. She was talking about how inclusive Orbis had become since the merger. Her voice sounded sincere. Her eyes didn't flinch. Malik didn't blame her. She probably believed it. At 1:14 p.m., a notification pinged his phone. It was a system alert from facilities. Office 2748 scheduled for inventory repurpose. Items will be collected by end of week. Please clear personal belongings. Malik read it twice. His office, the non-office, was being removed entirely. No discussion, no reassignment, just a polite eviction wrapped in procedural language. He walked back to the room and stood in the doorway, surveying what little was left. The stool, the shelf, the Ethernet cable. None of it was personal. He had brought nothing with him, on purpose. At 2:05 p.m., a junior HR coordinator stopped outside and peeked in. She didn't expect him to be there. She looked startled, then forced a quick smile. "Didn't know someone was still using this room," she said, adjusting the clipboard in her arms. "I'll mark it for next week then." Malik raised an eyebrow slightly, but said nothing. The silence stretched until she nodded and walked away. He sat back on the stool, folded his hands, and stared at the blank wall in front of him. There was nothing here. No desk, no recognition, no claim. And yet this was his space. It was his because it was denied to him. And in that denial, the company had carved his silhouette without realizing it. Malik didn't break stride. He didn't need acknowledgement anymore to feel the gravity of what he represented inside this building. By now, the company strategy had evolved from passive oversight to refined disorientation. What once was omission now became deliberate rearrangement. On his floor, the elevator doors opened to an altered layout. Furniture had been moved, cubicles shifted, walls plastered with new signage. The way to his hallway was blocked by temporary partitions that hadn't been there the day before. One sign read, "Departmental realignment, please follow detour." The arrows led nowhere. He walked around them. When he reached room 2748, the door was ajar. Inside, the shelf was gone. The stool had been taken. In its place, a stack of flattened cardboard boxes leaned against the wall, as if daring him to pack what he didn't have. A sticky note had been left on the inside of the door, curled at the edges, with a smiley face drawn next to the words "still using this space." There was no signature, no timestamp, just a smirk in ink. Malik closed the door behind him and sat on the floor. It wasn't an act of surrender. It was observation. From the ground, the office looked larger, emptier, like a hollow lung waiting to exhale. At 9:12 a.m., he received an email with the subject line, "Action, required parking reassignment." It informed him that his parking space had been moved to a lot across the street, 4 blocks away, and that he needed to confirm the change by end of day. He didn't own a car. He never requested a space. The message was just another brick in the wall of procedural confusion meant to distract, delay, and frustrate. He archived it. At 10:23 a.m., a calendar invite popped up. Surprise performance feedback 1 on 1 room 16C. No sender, no context. The meeting was in 7 minutes. Malik left his non-office and headed toward the room, finding it on the other side of the building. When he entered, it was empty. The lights were off. No chairs. A projector hummed against a blank wall, looping a silent video of company training footage. No one ever arrived. He waited 15 minutes, then left. Back in the hallway, 2 interns passed him and laughed as they turned the corner. One held a walkie-talkie, which crackled faintly with static and the sound of someone humming. Malik kept walking. At the cafe, he picked up a small coffee and reached for a lid. As he did, the stack toppled, scattering across the counter. The barista didn't help. Instead, she said, "Those aren't for self-service," before turning away. He picked up a lid, pressed it onto his cup, and left without comment. In the hallway, an announcement board had been installed overnight. It listed daily meeting schedules for senior management, including room numbers and times. His name wasn't listed. He looked for the meeting he was supposed to attend later that day, the Q3 strategy review. It wasn't on the board at all. He refreshed his email. The invite had vanished. The thread had been deleted not by him, but from the server itself. The subject line was now marked "Meeting, canceled, rescheduling TBD." But no new date appeared. He messaged the assistant who had sent the original invite. No reply. A minute later, a bounce back. Mailbox full. At noon, he tried to attend a department lunch. He had overheard 2 analysts talking about it in the elevator, saying there was open seating. He arrived at the rooftop patio only to find the door locked. Inside, through the glass, tables were arranged in perfect rows. People were seated by color-coded name tags. No extras were available. A woman on the inside saw him, tilted her head, and mouthed something he couldn't make out before turning back to her group. He walked away. Downstairs, the vending machines were out of order. He bought a protein bar from the lobby convenience store and sat on a bench near the stairwell, watching the sun break briefly through the fog outside. He took 2 bites and tossed the rest. He wasn't hungry. At 1:48 p.m., his computer disconnected from the Wi-Fi. When he tried to reconnect, the system prompted him for credentials he'd never been given. He contacted IT via internal chat. They responded, "Please contact your supervisor to verify workstation eligibility." Malik typed, "I don't have a supervisor. I report to the CEO." The chat bubble stayed silent. Then the message auto-closed. At 2:10 p.m., the lights in the hallway began to flicker. Emergency lighting kicked in briefly, casting everything in harsh red shadows. A voice on the intercom said it was a temporary test, but it lasted 20 minutes. During that time, Malik remained seated on the bench, untouched by the chaos. watching as staff rushed to recalibrate their devices and backup plans. No one asked if he needed anything. At 3:03 p.m., a new email arrived. The subject, friendly reminder, office clean desk policy. Attached were photos of desks violating company standards, cups left out, messy cables, personal decorations. One photo was of his former shelf, taken days earlier, showing his leather folio placed neatly next to the wall. The caption below said, "Unassigned space must remain clear." He had brought nothing else into the building. That folio was his only footprint. They had turned it into a violation. At 4:25 p.m., as the office thinned out for the day, Malik walked the long corridor toward the mailroom. A new poster had been put up outside the HR office. Spotlight this week, rising talent. 6 faces, all smiling, all bright, all new. At the bottom, special thanks to those who lead with humility. A photo collage followed, showing smiling faces of recent hires, most of whom Malik had never seen before. His name was listed at the bottom in a smaller font, misspelled again, Malik Dayton, and beside it, instead of title, it read TBD Advisor Support. The word support felt deliberate, a subtle downgrade disguised as placeholder. He took the elevator to his floor and found his former hallway darkened by a power outage notice posted on the wall. A technician stood nearby and shrugged, saying the circuits on that wing were overloaded and wouldn't be repaired until next week. When Malik asked where his new desk had been relocated, the technician said, "Try the bullpen maybe. They're moving some folks around." The bullpen was a noisy, open-plan space filled with temporary desks and long rows of mismatched chairs. It was where interns worked during onboarding and where freelancers sat when no conference rooms were available. Malik entered the room, spotted a single open station near the emergency exit, and sat down. The desk wobbled on one side, and the rolling chair clicked loudly every time he shifted. There was no monitor, just an outdated keyboard and a flickering desk lamp that buzzed intermittently. No one greeted him. No one offered help. The people near him, 2 junior marketing assistants and someone from Customer Insights, stopped talking when he arrived, then gradually resumed at a lower volume. At 9:33 a.m., he received a meeting reminder for Leadership Narrative Workshop mandatory attendance. The subject was vague, but the invite came from the Internal Communications Director, so Malik assumed it was optics related. He arrived on time to the large meeting room and took a seat in the corner. The facilitator began with icebreakers, asking everyone to state their department, their favorite leadership book, and a fun fact. When it was Malik's turn, the facilitator looked down at her sheet and frowned. "Oh, we don't have your name here. Are you shadowing someone today?" she asked, smiling as if the question was harmless. He responded calmly, "I was invited." Directly. The room paused, unsure whether to laugh. She gave a polite chuckle and said, "Great. Well, welcome anyway." She moved on without asking his fun fact. During the session, attendees broke into groups. Malik was left without one. He joined a table with 3 others, but when breakout tasks were assigned, his name wasn't on any of the printed worksheets. One of the group members suggested he could take notes for the table. He agreed. After the workshop ended, the facilitator approached him in the hallway and said, "Hey, just a heads up, next time, check in with HR before these events so we can assign you properly. It just helps the flow." Her tone was sweet, but the reprimand was clear. Malik said thank you and walked away. At 11:40 a.m., he received an invitation for a departmental Fun Friday planning committee sent company-wide. It included nearly every floor. In the list of tasks, someone had added his name under music and icebreaker game setup. He hadn't volunteered. He hadn't been consulted. A second email clarified assignments. "Malik, please coordinate Bluetooth speaker setup and assist with chairs by 2 p.m. He replied, professionally, that he was not on the planning committee and would be attending a strategy session that afternoon. He received no response, but at 1:15 p.m., as he walked past the break room, 2 junior associates looked at him and one muttered, "Guess the icebreaker guy bailed." They didn't know he heard. He didn't react. At his makeshift desk, someone had left a sticky note that read, "Thanks for handling the music later. Really appreciate it." The handwriting was bubbly, the smiley face at the end insultingly cheerful. He left the note in place. At 2:30 p.m., Malik entered the strategy session conference room, only to find his seat had been removed. The table was full, and 2 folding chairs lined the back wall for overflow attendees. His name tag was missing. A new manager with less than a month at the company now sat in the chair Malik had occupied the last time. She gave him a glance, uncertain, but didn't move. The VP leading the session greeted the group and began without acknowledging Malik's standing position. Midway through the meeting, Malik spoke up to clarify a point regarding vendor performance metrics. The room fell quiet, not because he interrupted, but because no one expected him to speak. The VP raised an eyebrow and responded, "Thank you for that perspective. We'll consider that in next week's analytics cycle." He said it like a school principal entertaining a student's suggestion about lunch menus. The conversation moved on. At 4 p.m., Malik returned to the bullpen. His desk was gone. In its place was a laminated sign that said, "Reserved. Equipment drop zone, do not sit." He looked around. The interns didn't make eye contact. He stood silently for a moment, then walked the floor looking for an open space. There were none. At 4:27 p.m., he sat on a bench near the vending machines and pulled out his folio. He reviewed his timeline of the week's events, cross-referencing emails, timestamps, names, and comments. The pattern had shifted again. It was no longer just erasure or misdirection. It had evolved into ridicule, mockery laced with plausible politeness, smiles paired with slights, invitations that weren't real, roles assigned that undercut his purpose. If they couldn't get rid of him, they would degrade him into parody, turn him into the joke they laughed about after hours. A man in a suit with no seat, an advisor setting up speakers, a strategist taking notes. The digital displays that usually cycled corporate slogans and employee highlights had been replaced with a single message scrolling in bold white letters on a black background. Transparency Initiative. Unveiling true leadership. Malik's gaze lingered on it. The timing was no coincidence. The initiative was the talk of the company's inner circles, a push from the board to improve governance and restore trust amid recent public scrutiny. But what no one expected was the role Malik was about to play. After swiping his badge, now functional without resistance, he bypassed the receptionist, who finally looked up and acknowledged him with a nod that carried a trace of hesitation and respect. Malik didn't respond. He took the elevator to the 30th floor, a floor he had never been formally invited to before. The hallway was longer here, lined with mahogany panels and recessed lighting. Portraits of previous CEOs and board members adorned the walls. At the far end, a door stood opened behind security guards who allowed him entry without question. Inside the conference room, the board of directors sat around a polished oval table. The atmosphere was different, tense yet expectant. Malik stepped in, folio in hand, and took his seat at the head. The chairman, an older man with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, motioned for silence. "Welcome, Malik," he began, voice measured but warm. "Today we begin a new chapter." What followed was a presentation unlike any Malik had seen in his time at Orbis. Detailed reports flashed on the screen, ownership percentages, acquisition timelines, and internal financial flows. At the center of these slides was Malik's name, appearing multiple times as a major stakeholder with controlling shares amounting to 62% of the company's stock. The room murmured. Some board members exchanged glances, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Malik's eyes were steady. He had never advertised this fact. He had never needed to. The chairman continued, "For months, we have operated with partial knowledge. Today, Malik reveals the reality of our stewardship. Documents were passed around, signed contracts, confidential purchase agreements, and shareholder meeting minutes, each clearly bearing Malik's signature or his proxies. It was a revelation that reframed every interaction Malik had endured. The erased nameplates, the misdirected emails, the intentional humiliations. He had been the puppeteer and the pawn, an invested party whose presence had been denied to manipulate perceptions. The CEO of Orbis was not some distant, aloof executive removed from the daily grind. He was Malik Drayton, majority owner and architect of the company's rebirth. The realization hit the room like a thunderclap. A board member cleared his throat nervously and asked, "Why reveal this now?" Malik responded quietly, "Because transparency is the foundation of trust, and trust has been in short supply. It is time to correct course." The chairman nodded. "Agreed. Malik, with your leadership, we will implement a strategic reorganization starting immediately." Then came the next surprise. A thick folder was slid across the table to Malik. It contained records of expenses, personnel changes, and confidential memos that confirmed suspicions of mismanagement and internal sabotage. Several board members swallowed hard, recognizing that the very people who had undermined Malik's authority had been exposed. Malik reached into his folio and placed a detailed plan of action before the group. It included budget cuts of up to 60% in underperforming departments, leadership changes, and policies aimed at restoring efficiency and respect within the company culture. There was no anger in his voice, no threats, only measured determination. The room felt the weight of his presence, no longer invisible, no longer marginalized. As the meeting ended, Malik stood. Chairs scraped softly against the polished floor. The board members filed out with newfound respect and a sense of realignment. Malik lingered for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window overlooking the city skyline. The battle was not over, but the ground had shifted irrevocably. Outside the conference room, employees passing by heard whispers. "Did you know Malik owned the majority stake?" No wonder he was being ignored. Everyone underestimated him. Malik's return to the floor was met with quiet acknowledgement. The receptionist smiled genuinely. A polished oak desk, dual monitors, a comfortable ergonomic chair. Yet Malik's demeanor remained unassuming. He knew the most powerful weapon was not to overwhelm immediately, but to steady the waters before the tide surged. At 7:45 a.m., Malik arrived before most staff. The lobby buzzed softly with a murmur of early risers, but as he walked, he felt the subtle acknowledgement of his presence. The receptionist smiled politely and greeted him by name, a small victory in a world that had so long denied it. He made his way to the 30th floor, where the board meeting had taken place. The hallway felt narrower today, framed by the weight of expectation. As he passed portraits of former CEOs, Malik allowed himself a brief nod to the legacy he was reshaping, not erasing. Before his first meeting of the day, Malik opened his laptop and reviewed the strategic plan he had presented the day before. It was detailed and ambitious. Budget cuts targeting bloated departments, restructuring that would place accountability over hierarchy, and initiatives to restore morale through transparency. Every recommendation was backed by data and tempered by compassion. He knew the changes would not be easy, but they were necessary. The first meeting convened at 9 a.m., a gathering of department heads summoned for a frank discussion about the company's future. Malik entered the room calmly. Instead of assuming a confrontational stance, he began by acknowledging the challenges the teams faced and the company's history of missteps. His tone was firm but inviting, offering collaboration rather than decree. The atmosphere, initially tense, softened as participants realized Malik was not there to punish, but to guide. When questions arose about specific cuts, Malik responded with clarity and rationale, emphasizing data-driven decisions over personal grievances. Throughout the meeting, his composure projected confidence and patience, qualities that inspired respect even among skeptics. Following the meeting, Malik walked the corridors, stopping briefly to speak with staff members. Unlike the previous days, his interactions were met with cautious warmth. Some offered tentative smiles, others nodded in acknowledgement. It was a tentative truce born of recognition, the first step in rebuilding fractured trust. At lunchtime, Malik entered the newly opened executive lounge, a space previously off-limits. The room was bright and airy, filled with the hum of quiet conversation. Malik chose a seat near a window overlooking the city skyline and observed the room. He noted faces of senior managers, some of whom now regarded him with new curiosity. A few approached him, starting conversations that felt genuine rather than obligatory. Emails flooded his inbox after lunch. Responses to his proposals, questions about implementation timelines, requests for meetings. Malik answered each with steady focus, aware that every interaction was a brick in the foundation of his restored leadership. At 3 p.m., Malik convened a smaller working group to begin drafting the operational changes. The group included representatives from finance, HR, marketing, and legal. He listened attentively as members voiced concerns and suggestions, integrating their input with precision. His ability to command respect without domination became clear. Throughout the afternoon, Malik received updates on budget reviews and preliminary staff assessments. He instructed his assistants to prepare communication plans that emphasized transparency and support for affected teams, understanding that change required not just strategy, but empathy. As the day wound down, Malik reviewed reports detailing the extent of internal resistance to his arrival, the subtle sabotages, the misinformation campaigns, the cultural barriers. He understood that patience would be key. Swift moves risk backlash. Instead, he planned incremental steps to regain trust while dismantling outdated structures. Before leaving, Malik made a point to visit the bullpen where he had once been relegated. The space was quieter now, less chaotic, reflecting the gradual shifts in culture. He paused at the doorway, meeting the eyes of a young intern who gave a shy smile. Malik nodded in return, acknowledging the unspoken support that even the smallest gestures could convey. The usual morning routines seemed tinged with uncertainty as employees whispered behind hands and refrained from crossing his path. The digital displays that once flaunted superficial corporate slogans now flashed the headline: Orbis Technologies announces strategic realignment and budget restructuring. Malik scanned the details on the monitor, noting how the announcement carefully framed the changes as necessary for growth, efficiency, and long-term sustainability. It was a public declaration of the changes that were already underway behind closed doors. Malik's first stop was the executive suite on the 30th floor, where he convened a meeting with the heads of finance, operations, marketing, and HR. The mood was more tense than the previous day's discussions, as the reality of the upcoming budget cuts began to sink in. Malik led the conversation with clear data-backed explanations, laying out the rationale for a 60% reduction in funding across several departments notorious for overspending and underperformance. He was deliberate in his tone, balancing firm resolve with understanding. This isn't about punishment, Malik emphasized. It's about survival and rebuilding trust with our clients, our investors, and each other. Some department heads shifted uncomfortably, aware that their own budgets and teams were under scrutiny. Others remained silent, digesting the implications of the proposed cuts. Malik had prepared comprehensive financial models detailing the projected impact and potential risks, leaving no room for guesswork or dispute. After the meeting, Malik took a moment alone in the conference room. He reviewed a thick binder of internal reports and internal audit findings that highlighted inefficiencies, mismanagement, and cultural issues within key departments. These documents, some leaked anonymously, had been collected meticulously over the past months. Malik's plan was not only to reduce budgets, but to restructure leadership in departments resistant to change. At 10:45 a.m., Malik called the CFO into a private meeting. They discussed the immediate steps for reallocating resources, approving the freeze on hiring, and accelerating automation initiatives to streamline operations. Malik requested daily updates on the progress of these implementations, signaling his intent to maintain close oversight. Later, Malik moved on to HR to review the personnel implications of the budget cuts. He emphasized the importance of transparency and compassion during the transition. "People will be scared," he said quietly. "We need to communicate clearly and support those affected with dignity and resources." The HR director nodded, already assembling plans for counseling services, severance packages, and career transition workshops. Malik understood that change was not only financial, it was deeply personal for the people whose jobs and routines would be disrupted. As the day progressed, Malik monitored the rollout of official communication to the entire company. Emails went out informing staff of the budget realignments, expected restructuring timelines, and avenues for feedback. Malik had insisted on openness, refusing to let the process become shrouded in secrecy as it had in the past. In hallways and communal spaces, whispers gave way to cautious conversations. Malik overheard a middle manager telling a colleague, "At least now, we're being told the truth." This small shift in morale was critical. Meanwhile, Malik's executive assistant coordinated scheduling for one-on-one meetings between Malik and department heads to discuss transition plans and answer questions. He made it clear these discussions were mandatory, signaling a new era of accountability. At 3:30 p.m., Malik walked through the main office floor, noting changes already underway. Empty desks marked positions eliminated, while some team leaders had visibly altered workloads and responsibilities. The once chaotic bullpen had been reorganized with clear seating charts and project teams clustered strategically. Malik's presence was met with nods, and for the first time, even some smiles. Not because he was an easy figure, but because he was decisive and transparent. As the afternoon wore on, Malik reviewed the preliminary impact reports. Early numbers showed a 35% decrease in operational expenses, with projected improvements in profit margins over the next 2 quarters. He knew there was more work to be done, but the momentum was real. He paused at a window overlooking the city skyline, reflecting on how the same place that had once made him feel invisible now served as a backdrop to his reclamation of authority. Before leaving the building, Malik checked in with a legal team, who were finalizing termination letters for a handful of senior executives whose performance and conduct were under investigation. The morning light filtered softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Malik Drayton entered Orbis Technologies for what he understood to be the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the company, but for himself. The changes he had initiated rippled quietly but powerfully through every corner of the building. What had once been a place where he was deliberately erased and marginalized now buzzed with cautious optimism and muted respect. The atmosphere had shifted, though no fanfare or grand announcement marked it. Instead, the transformation was woven into the fabric of everyday life, embodied in small gestures and meaningful symbols. Malik's office, now fully equipped and officially named, had a new nameplate engraved with his full name and title: Chief Executive Officer and Majority Owner. It rested on a polished oak desk alongside framed photographs, some of his family, others of early days when the company was still a startup, a reminder of the journey from obscurity to control. Yet, Malik rarely lingered there. Instead, he preferred walking the halls, engaging quietly with staff, listening intently to the stories they shared, sensing the cautious but genuine shift in culture. In the cafeteria, he noticed a small but telling change: a new menu item called Drayton's Blend, a specialty coffee crafted by the baristas, inspired by his preferred roast. It was a modest gesture, but one that spoke volumes about his growing presence and acceptance. Around the building, the walls, once stark and unyielding, now displayed updated murals celebrating diversity, leadership, and resilience. One corner featured a black and white photograph of Malik, taken on his first day, the image that had been cropped and ignored for so long. Below it, a plaque read, "From the invisible to the indispensable." It was subtle, but those who passed by felt its weight. At the company's entrance, a reserved parking spot bore a simple but dignified sign, "Reserved for Malik Drayton." It was more than a space. It was a symbol of his rightful place, silently declaring his leadership without need for ceremony. His daily routine reflected a balance between authority and humility. Meetings were conducted with firm direction, but also with space for dialogue and collaboration. He had learned that power was not a shout, but a steady voice, one that commanded through presence and integrity rather than volume and intimidation. One afternoon, Malik was invited to address the entire company in an informal gathering held in the open atrium. Standing before a crowd of employees, some still adjusting to the shifts in leadership, Malik spoke without scripts or slides. His words were measured, carrying the weight of experience and hope. He acknowledged the difficult journey, both his own and the company's, recognizing the pain, the exclusions, and the slow, often painful process of rebuilding trust. But he emphasized the potential ahead. He spoke of justice, not just in the sense of retribution or accountability, but as a fundamental principle of respect, fairness, and shared opportunity. He reminded the audience that a company's strength was in its people, and that every individual deserved to be seen, heard, and valued. The applause was quiet but genuine. No grandstanding, just sincere recognition. Afterward, employees gathered in small groups, discussing the changes, sharing ideas, and beginning to imagine a future different from the past. As evening approached, Malik returned to his office and looked out over the cityscape. The lights below twinkled like stars brought down to earth, a reminder of possibilities and the vastness of what lay ahead. The journey had been arduous, marked by invisibility, isolation, and resistance. But it had also been a testament to resilience, vision, and the power of quiet strength. Malik Drayton, once sidelined and undermined, had transformed from the unseen outsider into the guiding force shaping the company's destiny. His story was not just one of personal triumph, but a message that transcended the walls of Orbis Technologies, a reminder that true leadership demands patience, courage, and the unwavering belief in justice before injustice. As the building settled into night, Malik closed his laptop, took a deep breath, and allowed himself a moment of stillness. The fight was far from over, but the foundation was laid. The silence that had once drowned him was now filled with possibility. The invisible man was no longer unseen. He was indispensable. The end. If you enjoyed Malik's journey and the powerful message behind his rise, please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next gripping stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the plot stood out most to you? Where are you watching from? Drop your answers in the comments below and join the conversation.